had settled over Hollow's End, with the tender cruelty of an old lover, soft at first, then consuming. The moon, a silver wound in the sky, bled light across the cemetery gates as Raven stepped through them. Her lantern flickered in the damp air, a trembling eye that dared to stare into the dark. She had come here on a whim, or perhaps on an impulse more ancient than reason. The townsfolk whispered that the dead never rested in Hollow's End, that the chapel on the hill, its roof half collapsed, its bell, long silent, was haunted by a gentleman of shadows. They said his eyes gleamed like garnets, and that he spoke to those who mourned too long. Raven, of course, did not mourn. She merely wandered. That was what she told herself as her boots sank into the dew-soaked earth, as she traced the iron crosses with her fingertips and read the names of the forgotten. The fog thickened. The air tasted of iron and old stone, and then she heard it a voice. Low, cultured, laced with amusement. How quaint, it murmured from the dark. A living soul, keeping company with the dead. She spun, the lantern swinging in her grasp. Its flame trembled, painting a pale shape among the gravestones. A figure standing perfectly still beneath the ruined arch of the chapel. He was tall, his coat dark as the grave behind him. His face, a pale geometry of elegance and ruin. The wind tugged at his hair, black as midnight, and the faintest smile curved his mouth. The kind that belonged to those who had stopped pretending they were human centuries ago. "Who are you?" Raven demanded, though curiosity outweighed fear. "An admirer of courage," the stranger said, "or of recklessness. They are so very difficult to tell apart." He stepped forward. The light struck his eyes, and she saw it, an unnatural gleam, like wine held to firelight. Her pulse quickened. "You're trespassing," she said, though her voice softened as if the words themselves doubted their duty. "On whose land?" "The dead." He smiled wider. "They hardly complain. I should know." The lantern flickered. Somewhere beyond them, a crow cawed a jagged sound that sliced through the silence. Raven's fear melted into fascination. The stranger's presence filled the air, heavy with the perfume of old roses and decay. He spoke like a poet and a predator. "You should not walk here alone," he said finally. "There are things in this place that feed on beauty. Then perhaps they'll find none tonight," she replied, a spark of wit brightening her eyes. He laughed quietly, richly, as though he had forgotten how and rediscovered the art of it. "Ah," he said, "a defiant one. How rare." When she looked away, he was gone. Only the fog remained, curling about the chapel door. Yet something had changed in her. The air inside her lungs felt colder, her thoughts more fragile. As she turned to leave, a single black feather drifted down and landed at her feet. She took it with her, and when she returned home, she found, without knowing why, that she had left the lantern burning all night. The following night arrived, clothed in rain. It fell in delicate threads, whispering against the iron fences, bleeding over the old marble angels whose faces had long since eroded into melancholy. Raven returned to the cemetery without reason, without permission, only with the silent certainty that he would be there. Her lantern's flame danced madly, defying the wind. Inside her chest, her heart kept time with the thunder. When she reached the chapel, she found it as she remembered. Ruined but beautiful. The roof torn away so the heavens could peer in. A few candles burned within impossible, for no one in town dared to step beyond the gate after dark. Their light shimmered against the wet stone, casting long, golden veins into the shadows. And there he was, leaning casually against the old altar, a book in his hand, as though he were reading scripture to ghosts. The rain refused to touch him. It slid around his shape, parting like water around a blade. "I hoped," Raven said softly, "that last night wasn't only in my head." He looked up from the page, and his smile was quiet, lightning. "Hallucinations rarely return your gaze, miss." "Raven, how fitting." He closed the book and straightened, the motion fluid, almost theatrical. "The creature that feeds upon death, yet never quite belongs to it." "You know the symbolism, then?" she said, stepping closer, the lantern's light trembling between them. "And you are Alexander." A bow, half mocking, half sincere. Once of somewhere, now of nowhere in particular. The rain hissed on the stones. She noticed then how still he was, perfectly still. The air around him undisturbed, as though time itself deferred to him. "You live here?" she asked, "if such a word applies." His gaze followed her as she walked deeper into the chapel, fingertips brushing the moss-covered pews. "I exist here. Existence is much easier than living." There was humor in his voice, dry as winter leaves, but something else beneath it. Something aching and unspoken. "And yet, you keep the candles lit," she observed. "That seems rather alive to me." "Habits," he said. "Old ones. The dead are fond of ceremony." Raven turned toward him fully. "You talk as though you're one of them." "Perhaps I am," Alexander said, his smile returning, slower this time. "Or perhaps I am simply very good at pretending." Their eyes held. For a moment, all sound fell away. The rain, the wind, even her heartbeat, replaced by the strange, fragile silence of something ancient, remembering how to feel. Then he moved closer. His presence carried the scent of cold roses and dust. "And yet, you keep the candles lit," she observed. "That seems rather alive to me." "Habits," he said. "Old ones. The dead are fond of ceremony." Raven turned toward him fully. "You talk as though you're one of them." "Perhaps I am," Alexander said, his smile returning, slower this time. "Or perhaps I am simply very good at pretending." Their eyes held. For a moment, all sound fell away. The rain, the wind, even her heartbeat, replaced by the strange, fragile silence of something ancient, remembering how to feel. Then he moved closer. His presence carried the scent of cold roses and dust. 3 nights passed before Raven returned. She told herself she would not go, that she had work, that the world of the living required her presence. Yet the thought of him threaded itself through her hours like a curse. The candlelight at her window, The taste of wine, the whisper of rain, all seemed to echo his voice. When at last she surrendered, it was nearly midnight. The cemetery greeted her like an accomplice. The fog lay low and luminous, and the iron gates groaned open, as though they too had been expecting her. Alexander was waiting. He stood among the gravestones, head tilted toward the moon, his expression caught between reverence and mockery. "You came back," he said, and there was no surprise in it. "You lit the candles," she replied. "I thought it would be rude not to." He smiled at that, faintly, and gestured for her to follow. Together they walked between the graves, his pace slow, hers uncertain. The world around them was stripped of color. Only their shadows moved freely. "You keep strange company, Raven," he murmured. "Do you not fear what sleeps beneath your feet?" "They've never harmed me," she said. "Not yet," he answered, amused. "But the night is young." The wind stirred the trees, shaking droplets onto her hair. She felt the cold and, strangely, the absence of it around him, as though he carried a silence so deep that even the rain refused to touch him. "You make me curious," she confessed. "I don't know whether to call you beautiful or terrible." "Call me both," he said. "The difference has always been a matter of taste." He turned to face her then. His eyes caught the moonlight, glinting like garnet and ice. "Would you like to see where I sleep?" It was said almost playfully, but beneath the words, she heard the music of danger. Still, she nodded. He led her to the chapel, through a narrow door hidden behind the altar. A stairway wound downward, carved into the stone, damp secret, impossibly old. The air grew heavy, scented with earth and candle wax. At the bottom lay a chamber, a place of shadows and silence. Candles flickered in iron holders, their flames painting gold against the crypt's walls. A coffin rested in the center, carved with the same roses that adorned the chapel above. "This," Alexander said softly, "is where time forgot me." Raven felt no fear, only awe. "Do you sleep there?" she whispered. "When the sun insists." He smiled, faint and tired. "It's not as dreadful as it looks. Eternity teaches one to appreciate stillness. And you stay here, alone?" "Alone," he echoed. And for a moment, something unguarded flickered through his voice, a small, sharp ache. It was simpler that way. Until now, his eyes met hers. Until now. The words hung in the air, like incense, rich and slow. He reached for her hand, not swiftly, but with deliberate gentleness, as though uncertain whether she would allow it. When his fingers brushed hers, the contact was electric and cold. It felt as if her skin had touched the surface of a dream. "You shouldn't," she whispered, though she didn't withdraw. "No," he agreed softly, "but I will." Something changed, then, subtle, inevitable. The air between them became alive, thick with the pulse of things unsaid. The shadows deepened, and the candle flames bowed as though before an unseen wind. "You are trembling," he said. "Because I'm alive," she answered. "And that," he murmured, "is precisely what I envy." They stood like that for a long while. Two creatures poised between the possible and the forbidden. Then, with a half-smile that might have been sorrow, Alexander released her hand. "Go, Raven," he said, "before I forget what I am not supposed to want." She left him there, not running, not afraid, and when she stepped once more into the night, she found that the fog had lifted, revealing a full and watchful moon. But as she turned toward the gate, she noticed a single rose placed upon a headstone, dark, fresh, and glistening with rain. And though she never saw him leave it, she somehow knew whose hand had done so. Days blurred, as though the sun itself resented her for what she had seen. Raven went through them like a ghost, polite to the living but listening always for the hush that fell just before night. When the first star appeared, she would feel it, the pull, the small thread that drew her back to the chapel on the hill. Each time she went, Alexander was waiting. Sometimes he stood among the tombs, reading a book that had long since surrendered its ink. Sometimes he leaned against a statue, eyes half closed, as if he were listening to something no mortal could hear. They talked. Always they talked. He spoke of centuries like a man reminiscing about lost lovers, the cities that had risen and fallen, the music that had gone out of fashion, the taste of wines whose vineyards were now dust. He told her how the stars seemed closer when one forgot the warmth of daylight, how the world grew exquisitely sharp once every heartbeat ceased to matter. Immortality, he said once, smiling without joy, is the art of running out of goodbyes. Raven laughed softly. "And you? Have you truly run out?" "Not quite," he admitted. "You, for instance, are inconvenient proof that I haven't." Their meetings became ritual. She brought small things, candles from her room, a loaf of bread she never saw him touch, a handful of flowers she left on nameless graves. In return, he offered words, stories, and sometimes silence, the kind that felt full, as if something unspoken lingered between them. The humor that glimmered between them was strange and tender. When she teased him about his gloom, he would feign offense. "You wound me, my dear," he'd say. "I practice my melancholy. It's all I have left to master." "Then you're a dreadful teacher," she'd reply, "because you make it look beautiful." He would laugh. That low, silvery sound that always seemed to begin somewhere older than the night itself. One evening, as they wandered through the cemetery's back garden, a tangle of vines and headstones, the rain had half-claimed Raven paused beside a marble angel. Time had eaten away its face, leaving it blank. "Does it frighten you?" she asked. "To know that someday there'll be nothing left of you, not even your name?" "It used to," he said. "Now, I think I envy it." "Envy? To vanish completely. That is a mercy eternity denies." She touched the stone's hollow eyes, and a shiver ran through her. The wind smelled faintly of roses and rust. "Then why keep going?" she whispered. He looked at her for a long time, and when he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "Because sometimes someone walks into the dark and refuses to be afraid." She met his gaze, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to tilt. The night grew heavy, intimate, It was the first moment. She wanted him to touch her, not in hunger, but in proof. That night, she stayed in the chapel long past the hour, when even the crickets fell silent. The candles around the altar burned low, their wax dripping like pale blood down the brass. Alexander sat on the edge of the old pew, his coat folded beside him, watching the flame tremble. "Tell me something true," Raven said. "Something true. Yes, something you haven't told anyone. In 100 years." He smiled faintly, not looking at her. "I sometimes dream that I am still human. I wake up with my heart racing, and then I remember that it no longer beats. That's sad. It's ridiculous," he said, a trace of humor creeping in. "Imagine envying a pulse, and yet here we are." She hesitated, then reached out and placed her hand over the place where his heart should have been. His body was cold, but not lifeless. It hummed faintly, as though some echo still lingered there. "Maybe it still remembers," she said. "If so," he murmured, "it remembers you." The words struck her like a confession. She didn't move her hand. Neither did he. For the first time, the distance between them felt fragile enough to break. When she finally rose to leave, he caught her wrist gently. "Raven," he said, "the longer you come here, the harder it will be to return to the daylight. Then, perhaps, I'll stay. You say that now, and I'll mean it later." He let her go, but his eyes followed her all the way to the door. Outside, dawn was bleeding into the horizon. She felt it on her skin, the faint, invisible burn of a world she was beginning to leave behind. The rain had stopped that night, leaving the air heavy with the smell of wet leaves and stone. Raven climbed the hill under a swollen moon, her heart beating an uneven rhythm that seemed to echo in the ground itself. When she reached the chapel, no candles burned. Only the faint gleam of moonlight entered through the broken roof, laying silver scars across the floor. "Alexander?" Her voice trembled, swallowed instantly by the stillness. No answer. Then, from somewhere beyond the altar, a sound, low, steady, rhythmic, not words, not breathing. Something between them. She followed the sound down the stairway, into the crypt, each step whispering against the stone. The air was colder than before, sharp enough to sting, and there he was. Alexander knelt beside the coffin, his back to her, shoulders tense. His coat had fallen aside, and his pale hands were braced against the stone floor. Around him, candlelight quivered like frightened stars. "Alexander," she said again, softer. He turned too quickly, faster than any human should. For a moment, she caught a flash of something not quite his face. Eyes burning faintly red, a smear of shadow along his mouth. Then, as if a mask had fallen back into place, he was himself again, calm, elegant, unreadable. "You shouldn't have come down here," he said. "You told me once I could go where I pleased. I was wrong." He rose slowly, the motion smooth, but there was tension in him now, a coiled restraint she had never seen. When he stepped into the light, she saw it, a thin streak of crimson at the corner of his lips. Raven froze. "That isn't what it looks like," he said, too gently. "Then what is it?" A pause, a mistake. She wanted to move, to leave, but her body refused her. The air between them seemed alive, pulsing, humming, as though the chapel itself held its breath. "You're afraid," he said quietly. "Should I be?" He smiled without warmth. Yes, something inside her twisted, not in terror, but in a strange, thrilling recognition. The danger of him no longer hid in words or charm. It was real, near enough to taste. "What are you?" she whispered. He hesitated, then stepped closer. The shadows clung to him as though they belonged to his body. "You already know. Say it." "A sin," he murmured. Dressed as a man, her heartbeat quickened. "And you feed?" "Occasionally, reluctantly." His mouth curved, bitter amusement flickering through it. "Never upon those who ask too many questions. And yet, I'm still standing." "Barely," he said, voice low. "Don't tempt what even I fear." He was beside her now, closer than ever before. His eyes caught the candlelight, red deepening to gold. She could feel the cold of him against her skin, the whisper of his breath, if it could be called that, brushing her throat. "Why let me come here?" she asked. "Because I wanted to remember," he said, "what it was like to want something again. And now, I remember too well." His control slipped for just a moment, a flicker of hunger, quick and sharp. He turned away before it could consume him, hands clenched, shoulders trembling as though with pain. "You should go." "If I go," she said, "you'll just haunt me." He laughed, the sound raw, unguarded. "And if you stay, then you'll haunt me sooner." Their eyes met once more. The silence stretched until it felt alive. He took a slow step forward, then another, until only inches separated them. His voice dropped to a whisper. "There will come a night," he said, "when I won't be able to stop myself." "Then I won't stop you," she answered. For an instant, the word seemed to wound him. His expression broke sorrow, hunger, tenderness all at once. Then, as quickly, it hardened again. "Leave," he said, but his voice was barely more than a plea. She did not move. She lifted her hand instead and touched his cheek, cold, impossibly smooth, like stone that still remembered warmth. "Whatever you are," she whispered, "I'm already lost to it." And before he could answer, she turned and climbed the stairs, her footsteps echoing through the crypt like the tolling of a bell. Behind her, Alexander stood motionless, staring after her, while a single drop of crimson fell from his lips onto the cold stone floor. The wind that night had teeth. It tore through the trees and drove the rain sideways, so that the whole hillside seemed to shiver. From her window, Raven watched the chapel's silhouette blink in and out of lightning. She knew he would be there. She knew she would go. She left the lamp burning and stepped into the storm. The path was slick, the earth swallowing the sound of her steps. Every flash of light threw her shadow forward, and in each one she imagined his figure waiting. He was. Alexander stood at the chapel's door, coat whipping around him, eyes darker than the sky. When she reached him, neither spoke. The storm did the speaking. Inside, the candles had all gone out. Only lightning filled the room, each strike freezing them in a white instant of truth. Her hair plastered to her face, his hands clenched as if to keep them from reaching for her. "You shouldn't have come," he said. "You've said that before, and you never listen." "I'm here," she whispered. "Tell me why I shouldn't be." He stepped closer, the scent of rain and stone between them. "Because the moment I touch you, there will be no turning back." "Then don't stop." Lightning flared again. For the briefest second, she saw what the darkness hid. His eyes shining with hunger and sorrow, his mouth trembling between tenderness and ruin. He moved before she could breathe. Not a lunge, not violence. Something slower, heavier, inevitable. His hand found the back of her neck. The other lifted her chin until she met his gaze. "Raven," he said, voice almost breaking. "You don't understand what forever costs." "Then let me pay it." The wind roared through the roof. The candles struggled to live. He held her as if to memorize the warmth that would soon be gone. Then he drew her closer. The next sound was not a cry, nor a scream, but the softest gasp, half wonder, half surrender. The world around them narrowed to heartbeat and thunder, to the taste of iron in the air, to the tremor that passed between life and something beyond it. When the storm finally broke, the chapel was quiet again. Dawn found them sitting on the chapel floor, a pale light seeping through the cracks in the roof. Raven's head rested against his shoulder. Her skin looked almost translucent, as though the morning could see through her. Alexander watched the sky change color, his expression unreadable. "It's done," she said softly. "Perhaps. Will I? You'll know soon enough." She turned to him, eyes darker now, a faint shimmer to them that had never been there before. "Do you regret it?" "Every breath," he said, "and none at all." They sat in silence as the light grew stronger. When it touched his hand, he pulled away instinctively. She reached out, caught his fingers, held them in hers. "It doesn't hurt," she whispered. "Not yet." Outside, the wind carried the sound of bells, distant, uncertain, as if the town below had woken from a dream. Raven listened, smiling faintly. "It's strange," she said. "The world feels quieter. That's how eternity begins," he told her, with silence. He rose and offered her his hand. When she stood, her shadow did not fall the way it used to. Outside, the wind carried the sound of bells, distant, uncertain, as if the town below had woken from a dream. Raven listened, smiling faintly. "It's strange," she said. "The world feels quieter. That's how eternity begins," he told her. With silence, he rose and offered her his hand. When she stood, her shadow did not fall the way it used to. Weeks or hours, she could no longer tell. Passed. The townsfolk whispered of a girl who had vanished, of strange lights in the chapel. At night, some said they saw two figures walking the graveyard paths, one tall, one slender, moving side by side through the fog. Inside the chapel, two candles always burned. Sometimes, when the moon was right, the light would catch the stained glass and spill color across the tombs. In those moments, it was hard to tell whether the woman beside the pale man was breathing, or whether both of them were merely shadows pretending to live. One evening, A traveler passing by claimed he heard laughter from within the chapel, soft, familiar, and human. Another swore he saw only a single figure standing alone among the graves. The truth remained, buried with the rest of Hollow's End. Yet if one listened closely on nights when the fog rolled in from the river, one could hear a voice whisper through the air, gentle and content. Forever isn't so long when you're already lost in it. Time grew tired of counting. The chapel fell to ruin. Ivy swallowed the stones, and trees grew through the broken roof. The village faded from maps, its name carried only by the wind and the ghosts that whispered it. Yet sometimes, when the moon rose red and full, travelers claimed to see a flicker of candlelight through the shattered glass. Two shapes would stand together by the altar, motionless, close as breath. One pale as frost, the other shadowed by night. They never aged. They never changed. They simply waited. Beneath the floor, where the crypts opened like forgotten mouths, the air stayed unnaturally cold. Those who ventured too far said they heard voices drifting upward, low and distant, like a conversation held beneath water. Are you awake? Always. Does it ever end? It only changes shape, then silence again, until even the wind refused to enter. And so, centuries passed. In time, the world above forgot their names. The towns were rebuilt elsewhere. The forests turned to ash. The rivers rerouted. Still, under the earth, where stone met shadow, two figures remained. Sometimes she dreamed of sunlight she would never feel. Sometimes he dreamed of death that would never come. Between them hung eternity, beautiful, cruel, endless. When the stars themselves began to dim, their light fading like candles in an old cathedral, she stirred and smiled. The world is ending, she said. Yes, he answered, and we are still here. For the first time in centuries, Alexander looked at her and thought perhaps this was the cost of love. Not the loss of life, but the denial of its ending. She took his hand, her touch colder than the grave and warmer than memory. Then let it all burn, she whispered. We have forever to watch. Above them, the final stars flickered out. Below, two souls kept vigil, neither dead nor living, neither damned nor saved, only bound. And when the last light of the universe went dark, a single voice was heard in the silence. Forever isn't a promise. It's a curse we chose together.